The snow hit the windshield like shards of glass, blurring the road ahead, but I didn't care. 200 miles through a storm, 200 miles of whiteout conditions, just to find her. My mom. My mother, the woman who had once promised she'd always protect me, now left alone, somewhere cold, somewhere unforgiving. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as flakes whipped against my face. Every mile brought a mixture of dread and disbelief. 12 hours ago, I had received a frantic call from a neighbor. She hasn't been home. We think she's wandering somewhere near the highway. My heart had dropped. I had thought she was safe, cared for, warm. But now, racing through ice and wind, I feared the worst. When I finally saw her, outside a dimly lit gas station, it felt like time slowed. She was huddled against the wall, a thin coat barely shielding her from the blizzard. Her breath came in clouds, her eyes glazed with exhaustion and fear. And in that moment, anger replaced just concern. How had my own mother, my flesh and blood, been abandoned like this? The betrayal was subtle at first, a quiet, creeping suspicion. I had known she'd been arguing with my father for weeks, whispers of fights over money, threats of eviction, rumors that shouldn't have reached me yet. But I never imagined it had come to this. Her, freezing on the street, ignored and unprotected by the very people who were supposed to care. I jumped out of the car, snow crunching under my boots, and wrapped her in my scarf. She barely reacted, shivering violently, whispering, I didn't know where else to go. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the past with this shocking present. My parents, the people who had shaped my childhood, had failed her. They had let her spiral into desperation, into danger. The mother I had always known, the one who tucked me in at night and told me I could always come home, was now a victim of their neglect. And then it hit me, this wasn't just misfortune. Something darker had been at play. Why had she been left alone in the first place? Why had no one reached out sooner? My anger mixed with suspicion, a gnawing certainty that this had been orchestrated, or at the very least ignored, by those I once trusted most. I helped her into the car, wrapping her in blankets, trying to warm her. But beneath the relief, beneath the frantic prayers for her safety, I felt it, the first spark of determination. If this was neglect, if this was betrayal, I would not let it slide. I had come 200 miles through a snowstorm. I would go 1,000 more for the truth. And whatever I uncovered next, would change everything. After we got my mom safely back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Her hands were shaking violently, not just from the cold. Her eyes darted to the dashboard, then to her phone, as though she feared someone might be tracking her every move. On the drive home, she hesitated, avoiding my questions with vague answers. It's nothing, just some complications, she murmured, pressing her fingers to her lips as if to keep a secret. I wanted to believe her, to chalk it up to fear or exhaustion, but a knot of unease was forming in my stomach. The first red flag appeared in the form of phone calls. Every time her phone buzzed, she stiffened. She spoke in hushed tones, sometimes outside the car, always careful to hide the screen from me. I caught fragments of names and locations, names I didn't recognize, places she claimed she had to go alone. The secrecy felt deliberate, as if someone was controlling her movements, or worse, watching her. Then came the financial hints. While helping her settle back in at my apartment, I noticed unpaid bills piled high, statements showing overdrafts and missed payments. She brushed them off with weak excuses. I lost track, they'll understand, but the numbers didn't lie. Money was disappearing, and someone had been mismanaging her affairs long before she ended up stranded in the snow. Favoritism, subtle but sharp, appeared too. My younger cousin, who had always been pampered by the family, seemed to have everything arranged in his favor. He had a car, a steady allowance, and even new clothes delivered to the house my mom had vacated. Meanwhile, my mother, the very person who should have been prioritized, was left out in the storm, literally and figuratively. Every revelation was a punch to my chest. My heart ached not only for her suffering but for the betrayal I was beginning to sense. I had always trusted my family, believing they were united, protective, caring. And yet, now, everything was unraveling. Who had left her outside a gas station in freezing conditions? Who had allowed the financial strain to go unchecked? Who had been quietly shaping circumstances so that she ended up alone, vulnerable, ignored? I glanced at her as she shivered under the blanket I had draped over her shoulders. The emotional toll was crushing. The woman who had raised me, who had comforted me in childhood, was now a victim of circumstances I couldn't yet fully understand. My anger mixed with fear, forming a simmering determination to uncover the truth. The snowstorm was behind us, but a storm of secrets, lies, and hidden motives was only beginning to emerge. Whoever had allowed this, whoever had neglected her, would soon face the consequences. And I promised myself I would find out exactly. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Late that night, after my mom finally slept, I began going through old documents she had left behind, bills, bank statements, letters, and I saw it. The betrayal wasn't just neglect or carelessness. It was deliberate. Cold. Calculated. Every account she had opened in her own name had been secretly accessed by my father's new partner. Funds siphoned away, transactions hidden under vague labels. Money that should have supported my mom's basic needs, money that was rightfully hers, had been redirected into accounts she had no access to. Her vehicle had been repossessed without notice, utilities shut off despite timely payments, and her attempts to secure help were blocked at every turn. I stared at the documents, my hands trembling. Rage and disbelief coursed through me, a storm matching the snowstorm I had driven through hours earlier. How could they, my family, the people I trusted, allow this to happen? How could they strip her of everything she needed, leaving her to freeze on the side of the road, while pretending everything was fine? It wasn't just money. There were letters, legal documents, and signed forms I had never seen. A power of attorney had been manipulated to hand control of her finances to someone outside the family, someone my parents claimed could help her manage better. In reality, it had been a betrayal of trust on an unimaginable scale. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed. 12 years of absence, 12 years of watching her struggle from afar, and now I understood the full extent of her suffering. My mother's survival had been a silent battle against deception, betrayal, and greed, betrayal by the very people who had promised to protect her. But beneath the heartbreak, beneath the shock, a cold clarity began to settle in. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't helpless. The evidence was there. Every manipulated account, every forged signature, every lie, proof that this betrayal was intentional. And that proof could be used. Strategically. Carefully. I clenched my fists and felt the heat of determination surge. 12 years of absence, 12 years of silence, had given me perspective. My mother had been left to suffer, but now I had the tools, the knowledge, and the fire to ensure that the people responsible faced the consequences. The betrayal was total. But total betrayals leave traces, and I intended to follow every one of them. I glanced at my mother, sleeping uneasily in the spare room, unaware that her child had returned not just to comfort her, but to uncover the truth and, eventually, to deliver justice. The storm outside had ended, but the real storm, one of truth, confrontation, and reckoning, was only beginning. And when it came, those who had betrayed her would see firsthand that the child they had underestimated was no longer powerless. In the dim light of the kitchen, snow still streaking the windows, staring at the mess of papers spread before me. For a moment, the weight of the betrayal threatened to crush me. I felt anger, yes, but also exhaustion, sorrow, and a gnawing ache of helplessness. My mother had been abandoned, deceived, and manipulated for years, and I had done nothing to stop it. Then it hit me, sitting in despair would accomplish nothing. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside me, but unlike the blizzard, this one was mine to control. My mother had survived the cold, survived betrayal, and now it was my turn. 12 years of absence had forged me, shaped me, and taught me that I could not rely on anyone else to fight her battles, or mine. I realized something powerful. The people who had betrayed us, my father, his partner, the enablers, had assumed I was still the powerless child they once dismissed. They thought absence in time had weakened me. They had underestimated me. That assumption would be their undoing. I began to plan. Carefully. Strategically. This wasn't about blind revenge, it was about justice. Every altered account, every missing dollar, every forged signature would become evidence. Every secret call, every lie, every instance of neglect would be documented. I would be meticulous. I would be patient. And when the time came, no one could deny the truth. The fire in my chest grew with every thought. I wasn't just angry, I was determined. Determined to ensure my mother's safety, her dignity, and her rightful security. Determined to confront the betrayal not with emotion alone, but with precision, clarity, and undeniable proof. For the first time in years, I felt fully awake, fully capable. The hurt was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it had transformed into something sharper, stronger, purpose. I would not allow the past 12 years of manipulation and neglect to define us any longer. The people who had cast my mother aside, left her freezing on a roadside, thinking she could be ignored, they had made one fatal mistake. They had assumed I would remain powerless. Now, I understood that power comes not from wealth, influence, or proximity, but from knowledge, preparation, and determination. I would gather the evidence. I would expose the lies. I would reclaim what had been stolen. And when I did, the reckoning would be complete. I looked at my mother sleeping in the spare room, her chest rising and falling with slow breaths. She didn't know it yet, but we were no longer victims. The child they had underestimated had returned, and she would not rest until justice had been served. The storm outside was fierce, but I felt something fiercer still within me, the unwavering determination to fight back and to win. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. That was the hardest part, sitting across from people who had nearly let my mother die, pretending I knew nothing. But patience was my sharpest weapon now. They still believed they were in control. I intended to keep it that way. Step 1 was evidence. Not assumptions. Not emotions. Proof. I requested copies of my mother's medical records, documenting hypothermia risk and exposure. Then I pulled her bank statements going back years, tracing every suspicious withdrawal, every account she suddenly lost access to. I compared dates, money drained shortly before utilities were shut off, shortly before she was forced out of her home. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. Step 2 was exposing the paper trail they thought was invisible. I contacted the bank directly, posing as an advocate helping my mother recover from financial abuse. That single phrase changed everything. Compliance officers became attentive. Statements became detailed. I learned exactly when power of attorney documents had been filed, and more importantly, when they had been used. Some transactions were flagged instantly. Others raised questions that couldn't be brushed away. Step 3 was witnesses. I started making calls. Old neighbors. Former coworkers. Even the gas station attendant who had let my mother sit inside for 10 minutes before management told her to leave. Each story filled in gaps. My father's partner had told people my mom was unstable. That she refused help. That she chose to leave. The lies were consistent, and that made them fragile. Step 4 was the trap. I let them believe nothing had changed. I thanked my father for checking in. I reassured his partner that mom was doing better now. I even mentioned, casually, that we weren't planning to involve lawyers, watching relief flicker across their faces. They relaxed. They talked too much. One voicemail, left accidentally, confirmed they believed the situation was handled and no longer a risk. Handled. As if my mother freezing outside a gas station was an inconvenience they had solved. Behind the scenes, I contacted a legal aid group specializing in elder financial abuse. I handed them everything: documents, recordings, timelines. They didn't gasp. They didn't hesitate. They told me quietly, "This is serious." Still, the villains felt untouchable. They went on with their lives. Planned trips. Made purchases with money that wasn't theirs. They laughed, confident that the storm had passed. But storms don't end when the snow stops falling. Sometimes they wait. And as I finalized the last piece, choosing where the truth would surface and who would be watching, I felt the tension tighten like a wire pulled too far. They thought they had won. They thought my mother was forgotten. They had no idea how close they were to losing everything. The courtroom was packed, the winter sunlight slicing through tall windows like a spotlight on truth. My parents sat at the front, stiff, confident, or at least pretending to be. They believed they had hidden everything, controlled the narrative, and silenced my mother's suffering. They were wrong. I walked in with my evidence in hand: documents, bank statements, medical reports, audio recordings, and the timeline of neglect. The prosecutor gave me a nod, and I felt a surge of quiet power. Today, the truth would be unstoppable. First, the financial abuse. I presented the records of stolen funds, showing the diverted accounts, the altered power of attorney, and the transactions timed perfectly to leave my mother vulnerable. Each entry was undeniable. The judge's eyes widened, the courtroom murmured. My parents' calm facade faltered. Then came the neglect. I recounted, step by step, the day I found my mother outside the gas station, freezing and alone. I played security footage from the station, showing her shivering, wrapped in a thin coat, desperately trying to get assistance. Gasps echoed through the room. Even my father's partner, who had tried to look composed, now fidgeted with sweaty palms. Next, the witnesses. Neighbors, friends, and even the gas station attendant testified, confirming the patterns of neglect and deception. Each story was another nail in the coffin, exposing the lies my parents had told for years: that she was unstable, that her hardships were self-inflicted. Every word shattered their narrative. And then came the final blow: public exposure. I had arranged for parts of the proceedings to be live-streamed, carefully shared with the family circle and local news outlets. My parents' names, their greed, their calculated neglect, broadcasted for everyone to see. The smug certainty they had clung to for so long crumbled. They had tried to erase my mother, now the world was watching as their reputation disintegrated. When the judge finally rendered the decision, it was decisive. Control of all misappropriated funds was returned to my mother. My parents were legally barred from making unilateral financial decisions regarding her. And the restitution? Public acknowledgement of their abuse, a humiliation designed not by emotion, but by justice. As we left the courthouse, the winter wind biting at our faces, I glanced at my mother. She held her head higher than she had in years, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and astonishment. The people who had left her stranded, cold, and forgotten had been fully exposed. The child they abandoned had returned, not broken, not powerless, but formidable, patient, and victorious. For 12 years, they had underestimated us. For 12 years, they thought they were untouchable. Today, they learned the cost of betrayal. The courtroom drama had ended, but the echoes of that day lingered like the chill of a winter storm. My parents, once so proud, so untouchable, were now shadows of their former selves. Friends had distanced themselves, neighbors whispered, and every carefully curated image of control and respect had been obliterated. Their betrayal had cost them more than money, it had cost them dignity, credibility, and the illusion of power. My mother, however, was radiant. Not because of the money returned, not because of the legal victory, but because she was finally free. Free from neglect, from lies, from the people who had once abandoned her in the cold. She laughed easily now, with a lightness I hadn't seen in years, and for the first time, I realized that revenge wasn't only about justice, it was about restoring what had been stolen, her life, her peace, her sense of security. For me, the transformation was even more profound. 12 years of absence, of hurt, and of distance had forged patience, resilience, and strategy. I was no longer the powerless child who had watched helplessly as her world crumbled. I had returned, and in doing so, I had reclaimed not only my mother's safety but also my own strength. I could face betrayal, confrontation, and injustice, and come out stronger. The poetic justice was undeniable. The people who had left her shivering outside a gas station, believing their actions would remain hidden, had set the stage for their own destruction. Every lie, every act of manipulation, every cold calculation had been documented, exposed, and delivered back to them in full force. In trying to erase my mother, they had revealed their own corruption to the world. To everyone watching this story, have you ever felt abandoned, betrayed, or powerless in the face of someone you trusted? Have you ever wondered if justice could ever reach you? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story matters, and sometimes, it's in speaking out that we find our own strength. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button. Because the truth is this, the ones who think they can betray and forget you often underestimate the power of patience, preparation, and unwavering determination. As we walked away from the courthouse that day, my mother and I, the winter wind biting at our faces, I felt it deeply. The child they had rejected, abandoned, and underestimated had returned, stronger, unstoppable, and finally, victorious. The ones who left you in the cold are often the first to freeze when the storm of truth finally arrives.